Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to tonight's second half. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadomley. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's second half, shall we? All right, folks, this is a hunt that Victor shared with us, and one that I was especially fond of because it showed what kind of person he really was. The San Leandro Hunt, April 18th, 1992. Dogman kills 2 fugitives on the run. Well, it was a slow day, and just about every agent was in the office enjoying their coffee and some bad jokes. The CO calls me in and asks if Ellis is ready for some field training. I reply he is the youngest man here right now, but this agent can really shoot. And I remind the CO what happened when he was put before Raphael, that he had passed out, but on the count of his shooting ability, we did hire him. He's very fast and accurate with a handgun, deadly accurate. We talk a few more minutes and call him in to join the conversation. He is agreeable to everything myself and the CO are talking about. So we are supposed to report to San Leandro Police Department to pick up our file, which is not normal operating procedure. I tell him to saddle up, and he tells me he needs to go back to the barracks and get his equipment. Everyone roars with laughter. Not so much at him, but at me. It was going to be a babysitting trip. At this time, I still had 2 or 3 ahead of me in rank, but I was trying to make my way through them as best as I could without busting anyone's buns. He finally makes it back about 25 minutes later, and we head to the helicopter pads and take off. I tell him to get comfortable and rest best he can, because when we hit the ground, we're going to move fast and not slow down. All he wants to do is talk and know what to expect after we get onto the ground. I try to keep it together and keep my cool with this young Marine. I explain what to expect out of him, and he is paying almost too close attention. He's reading my lips and hearing me, also absorbing everything I say. And it's like he's a robot or something. After about 4 hours of this, and dark comes upon us, he finally backs off, gets into position to sleep, and looks like a young kid lying there. It would make you think of your own kids back at home. Finally, sleep came for me, and I felt us landing, and we were putting down to refuel before carrying on with the trip. I got out of the cargo area, and Ellis slept right through the whole ordeal, even starting the Chinook up and taking off. I don't see how, but he never did wake up. It was well after daylight when we landed the next morning, somewhere around 10:40 hours. And they had a car waiting for us. We put our gear in the back seat, and we were wearing our weapons when we entered the police station. We were met by the chief of police, Ballard, and game warden, Brian Johnson, who had a file and was going to take us out to the scene of the attack. So I ask, why are the police involved? He states that this started out as a robbery gone bad at the grocery store late in the day. That the male entered the grocery store and he was going to rob it. His female accomplice was already in the store, but no one knew she was with him. There had been 2 officers in the store in plain clothes, off duty, when all this went down, so they confronted him. And now that he was outgunned, he grabs a hostage. The hostage is his accomplice, unknown to police. So they back off. And it's almost dark outside now, and he and her are making for the door slowly. Other units are on their way, but don't get there before they reach the outside and are able to make it under a 580 going east on foot into Chabot Park. They then called the dogs in and the game wardens to assist in the search for the 2 fugitives. Then Brian and the state patrols took over and explained they traveled about 1 mile due east and was nearing Redwood Road when they were attacked by dogs, as best as he can tell. That's where the female's body is, and we have men there with her, standing guard to make sure they don't come back and feed on the body. Or anyone happens by. It's a good place for homeless people to camp out. I asked about the man. His pistol is lying there empty, but we found where he crossed the road. And he is hurt because we found he is losing blood where he crossed. But we have not tracked him any further because we don't know what we are dealing with. I say dogs, but I really don't think dogs could do this to a human body. No way. Brian said, and the police chief interjected and said, I'm sure he doesn't want to hear any Indian tales, Brian. I took Brian aside and asked him what he thought it might be, and he said it was a Dogman, that his girlfriend had taught him all about them. There were just a few pictures in the file, but I could tell by looking at those photos that he was right in what he was telling me, and he knew what had killed the female and was probably going to kill the male. We rejoined the chief, and I told him I needed to be put out where they went under the Interstate 580. Brian said that's where I come in now. I'm your ride, and I said good. We get out into his truck, and I tell him to give me a few minutes, and ask how far we are from where they went under the interstate, and he says about 7 minutes. I complete going through the file and ask him to start driving, and hand the file to Ellis to read and tell him he has 7 minutes to come up to speed on the case. He actually got close to 11 minutes due to traffic lights. We park the truck and myself and Ellis get out and get ready to start the tracking process on this pair of fugitives, and which way they went. I ask Brian to drive around to the other side, and go the body and meet us there, but not to come on the west side of the body till after we come and check out everything. Move everyone to the east side of the body and keep them there. Have the ambulance there so they can pick her up once we are finished, okay? He says yes and headed on his way as we did. We enter Chabot Park, just south of the zoo, as you could hear the animals making their noises, and all the sounds associated with the zoo. I told Ellis to settle down and quit shaking like he was, and he stated it was excitement that everyone said I was the one to learn from, that he wanted to read my file about Little America and how I survived it. I told him let's clean this up and pick up on track on these people, and we will move forward after that. He shook his head okay. Just as soon as he dropped out of sight from everyone, I asked him to stop, turn around, and pulled and checked his pistol, and nothing was in the chamber. Then I checked his rifle, nothing in the chamber. I asked why. He said he wasn't hunting, and I informed him that once we left that truck, we were actively hunting, which he couldn't believe. I loaded both of his weapons, replaced the pistol into his holster, and said, don't ever forget how to use it, and keep it ready, always. Handed the rifle back to him with the safety on and told him the same thing, and told him to take point. pick up their trail and lead me to her body slowly, and to listen to my instructions to the T. I stayed maybe 10 yards behind him till he picked up their trail. I'd been watching their trail for almost 50 yards prior to him picking it up and pointing it out to me. We had entered into some sanded area, and I pulled young Ellis to stop. He knelt down and waited for me to give him the signal, or a verbal command to move on. After about 3 minutes and finding 2 different sets of Dogman tracks, I let him know it was okay to move on. We moved about 100 yards, and he throws up his fist and drops to one knee, and I freeze dead in my tracks, and he motions me forward and low. I do, and he points out 3 sets of Dogman tracks and a .40 caliber handgun casing, a single shot. I put a rock on top of the casing, pat him on the shoulder, and he grinned ear to ear, and I pointed forward with 2 fingers. Another 200 yards, and up came his fist again. This kid really knows how to run point. Only he will be able to run it under the pressure of real targets. Now we are up to 4 targets, and I am out here with an agent who has never fired his weapon at a living target other than human beings. Yes, he has 12 confirmed kills, but that still doesn't prove himself against monsters, especially after passing out from facing Raphael. Also, he locates 2 more casings, so these poor folks know these creatures are after them. While he is setting a small rock on top of the casing, I'm looking around in the bushes to see if I can find any blood, but there is not any at all. So he is not shooting at them or hitting them, and these creatures are running all around them. Why is he not shooting at them more than he was? We've only found 3 empty casings so far. There should have been 10 to 12 in a .40 cal clip, I would think. Never owned a .40 caliber, so I don't know about them. So now it's getting later in the day and we reach the body, and Brian has everyone a good 30 yards east of the body with the ambulance sitting on ready to pick this poor lady up. So as we study the scene, I can tell that Ellis is turning a little green around his gills, and ask him to take a walk and see how far it is to where he crossed the road, and told him to watch himself. After he returned and reported back, I had talked with Brian, and it looks like she was running behind the man, and she tripped, and then 1, maybe 2, got on her back, and 1 or the other penetrated her aorta, and all her blood drained out from her in a matter of minutes. Plus 1 or both slashed her back once, maybe twice. I told one of the officers on the scene that the body could be picked up, and that there was no longer need for them to stay in the area once the body was gone, just to clean up all of the tape and remove everything that they could. They said that they would comply with their orders and leave to report back to the chief. I thanked one and all. Once again, young Ellis asked why I did this after we had left them. And I asked him, "Are you any better than any of them men that was working a hot-ass beat to make a living for their families and put their lives on the line day after day?" He answered no. Said he would be back in a few minutes. I told him just to catch up. We stopped at Brian's truck, and I asked Brian if he had any plans for tonight, tomorrow, or the next few days till we find this guy's body, and he replied, "I thought you'd never ask." I told him that once we found the other body, his part would be over, and he would not be able to continue on with us as we go after the Dogman. He said that he understood fully. Brian opened the back door and set out a small pack, and said it had everything in it he would need to go with us. He had 2 boxes of .375 H&H Magnum aluminum rifle and a .357 Magnum pistol, and then the basic camping supplies and a 3-day supply of food. We were just about to walk away, and here comes young Ellis, and he wants to take lead, and I say no this time, and he starts to question me. Then he sees that Brian is tagging along and thinks better of it before he says anything about it. I take point, put Brian 5 yards behind me and Ellis 10 yards behind Brian, and tell him to keep your eyes peeled sharp, that I only shoot north, east, south, and Brian shoots north and south only, and Ellis shoots north, west, and south. Everyone got your orders? It was dark now, and Brian had his own night vision goggles. I asked Brian where we were headed, and he said if he headed northeast, that would take us into some fairly large mountains for quite a long while before we hit any type of civilization. But if we stayed due east, we would be traveling towards San Roma, California. I tracked this man till just after 1:20 hours, and the howls started. We set up, figured that they smelled us, and I set us up on a tighter perimeter. How was I going to explain having a game warden on the hunt with me? I knew this was not going to end well for me. We all hunkered down. I was 20 yards out in front of everyone else. I figured I was good for 4, especially back then. I was much faster, and everything I did was just much quicker, smoother movements back then. The night wore on, and nothing ever happened. It never went totally quiet, and they never approached us that night. But I realized another problem with Ellis that night. When he fell off to sleep, he snores, and snores very badly. And that is something else he was going to have to talk to our CO about. Things were mounting up against him, and he was just so likable, it was crazy. How you had to like him after you were around him just for a little while. I was up before light and had some coffee on, and Brian ended up shaking Ellis awake and getting him stirring, but he finally did. Stated we woke him up too early to start the day. I laughed and said, "What are we going to do with you when you have to go 3 or 4 days straight without sleep at all? We almost had to do that last night." He went ahead and got up, stowed his gear, and was ready to leave out whenever I was, and I stated it would be after good daylight so that we didn't miss anything that we could have missed in the dark. I know he was still on his feet at this point, and he said, "How do you know this?" And I shined my light between his feet. And there was a track with blood spots in it. I explained you always have to be on the lookout for these types of signs. The victims and the predators, they are all around here. But no one said anything about them last night before I put us in formation. Brian said he saw the tracks last night, but figured since we were on the trail there was no use of saying anything about them. Why should we say anything came out of Ellis's mouth? And I snapped back to let me know that you're paying attention, and I'm not out babysitting you like everyone back in the office thinks I'm doing right now. Why would they think that? He shouted back. Because you're of actions. No, we don't make you get up at any certain hour, and yes, you can report when you want. But you need to look at what we do and what we are up against, and how many men apply for this job and are turned away. Who really gets to hunt monsters for a living? Sure, you can't go out and brag about it. They will all think you're crazy, till your back looks like mine. Then you can say you have fought a monster and came out ahead. I told him, look, nobody wanted to go on the first hunt with you, and I kept my mouth shut, never said one way or another. I was third in line to go out, and I knew when I was called in that you were going to be tagging along, and I never said a word about it. I bragged on how good of a shot you were, and I did remind the CO what happened when you were in front of Raphael. And I don't think you have been back to the enclosure since, and yes, this worries me. At the time, Brian is staring at me with more and more questions building up, and I can see them building up. So I turn to Brian and tell him, Brian, I can't answer any of your questions you are going to ask, so please don't ask. And he tips his hat but continues to listen. I then said after we find this body that Brian will drop out of our little team and call in and get help to get that body out. And we will continue till we catch up with the Dogman, and we will take the 4 of them out. Sun's up good now, and it appears to be a sunny April day in California. I'm standing about 40 yards from Brian, and Ellis comes by and says he's sorry. I tell him no problems. Let's just work together as one machine instead of 2 different ones, and do our duty. Hoorah, sir! And off he goes, thinking he's feeling better about himself now, but also thinking he will be high maintenance to keep motivated and going in the right direction. We leave out, me on point and Ellis in the middle and Brian on our trail. We have turned almost due north, and Brian has picked up on this as we start to enter the highly rocky area. Much easier to track the man now with his blood droplets showing on the rocks. Also a good place to get ourselves ambushed, so I tighten up on the group. As we continue to move forward, I spot the man's foot and stop everyone and ask everyone to look closely and see what they see. And both of them spot the foot within a couple of minutes. I put them back to back as I move forward to check the situation and find the man's deceased and almost eaten mostly from the waist up is gone. No way to identify him, and this day is slipping away. And I don't think it's safe to leave Brian here alone, so I break out the satellite and make a call to the CO and report in that it's for Dogman, and we are on the trail. He asked if I want another agent to join us, and Ellis can hear our conversation, and I tell him no, that me and Ellis have this. And the CO says, "Are you sure?" And I say, "Yes, sir." I'm hoping in my heart he can just get 1. That's all I'm asking for, just 1. That made his spirits rise that much higher. Someone was putting some faith into this young man, and maybe this would make him grow. Only time would tell. It was now 15:55 hours, and we had just gotten our coordinates called in, and they told Brian to tell us to go on, that they should be there around midnight, and that he could guard the body and then help it get out, that they were sending in 6 men. I told Ellis to make camp. We would hunt tomorrow and tomorrow night. We all got comfortable 40 yards away from the body with a little better view should they return during the night. We laughed and caught up, and before dark I changed my shirt, and Brian said, "What the hell got a hold of you?" Ellis jerked around, and I stood there for a minute, and then I put my shirt on and told him a werewolf. He said, "They are really real?" I answered and spent the next hour telling him about the Wyoming hunt, and Ellis's eyes. You could tell that he would never make it if he went up against a werewolf. He would definitely lose. You could see it in his eyes, his face. I knew this now, but I had to continue down this road with him, and knew I had to protect him and get him back to Virginia just so the CO could fire him. But the boy would be at least alive. I knew he could fool me, and we would soon find out. The dark settled in on us, with the clouds too. You couldn't see the body unless you were about 20 yards away. Everyone had picked a spot to sleep, but I moved both Brian and Ellis side by side so I could see them. Watch the body and watch the trail from one spot, all at one time. Didn't seem like it took them long to drift off asleep. I was supposed to be wake one of them about 0100 to take over watch, but I wasn't going to trust myself to either one of these two sorries. Also, the other 6 came in about 23:15, and I put all of them where I could watch and told them to rest well. I was used to doing what I was doing for days on end, so they just made as little noise as possible and went to bed. I woke everyone up the next morning, and somebody else broke out the coffee for everyone, and we drank till everyone was full. Then we cleaned up the area, and 2 men went down and took pictures of the body. They were with the sheriff's office. They had me to point out the footprints, the cleanest ones I could find. He was missing 1 shoe, and we all spread out that day, and never did find that shoe, but I tracked him to that spot, and he had 2 shoes on that whole way there. After they got everything they said they needed, they put the body in a body bag and started back with Brian. He tried to continue on with us, but I reminded him of our earlier conversation, and he shook my hand, and off he went, giving me his number to call when we returned. He would pick us up. I thanked him again, and myself and Ellis were off to do what we were here to do. 1120 hours, and we could no longer see or hear them, and we started to track. And I'm on point with Ellis, maybe 8 yards beyond. And every once in a while, we will hear a lone howl, but nothing close. The woods never go silent, but there is a strange feeling in the air. Nothing I can put my finger on, and nothing I'm worried about. Just something there. It's now 1620 hours, and the woods go totally quiet. In one step, everything shut up. I threw up my fist and put him on the ground in a defensive position, and we were both scanning the woods, but neither of us were able to see anything or hear anything at this time. I told us in this position for a long time in the woods. They remained quiet, which is probably at least 3, maybe 4 hours before the woods came back to life, and I stand up and approach Ellis. He asked what just happened, and he didn't recognize the silence. So we back up about 100 yards. This kid has me on edge, and I don't want to move forward with him like this. So I tell him to bed down, and I will take first watch again. And he has just caught on that I don't intend to sleep any of this night, and if I sleep during the day, it will only be for short naps, at that correct. And I reply, yes, sir. He started to build a fire, and I said, no fire tonight, sorry, just roll out your sack and get in it. As he lied down, he asked, have I made you mad, sir? Have I done something so terribly wrong that I can't continue? I said, no, Ellis, there are some things that you will have to address with the CO that could get yourself killed. And if you have a second agent with you, get them killed as well, if you don't get something done about it. And some things are just plain simple mistakes that you can fix on your own, and some you can't fix on your own. Just get some rest. You're going to need it tomorrow, Ellis. So I stood guard through the night again without waking Ellis up, and the forest going silent and then opening back up again, back and forth throughout the night howls that sounded no more than maybe 100 yards. Me tucked away beside Ellis, maybe 7 feet, just in case anything came close or smelled us out. I was really tired and ready for whatever they threw at me this night. I was ready, but again they never came for us. And why didn't they come? They know that we are here, and why. Here comes the sun, so I put on some coffee just to see if my talk had done any good. I didn't wake Ellis up. I actually thought about leaving him in his sack and moving on without him, but that wouldn't be right. but I did use the time to call and talk to the CO and give him a heads up on everything that has went wrong so far. And he asks for my recommendations. I said very sternly write up and assign him to only one type of cryptid, that we will make him a specialist of a Dogman. That is, all he'll have to deal with is the Dogman. The CO is agreeable to that if Ellis would be. We would have to see if he's agreeable to that. He arose finally at 10:30 hours, and you could see guilt in his eyes. He started to speak, and I held up my hand. I didn't want to hear any more from him. He ducked his head and put his things away and rose and drank some coffee, and we were soon off. We were in some very large rocks that had a lot of overhangs, and we had to check most of them as they had to be looked into. Ellis was not saying very much today. He knew after the talk I had given I was expecting more out of him, and he had let me down. I don't know where he came up with these hours like he did, but that's what he had in his head. I kept telling him to get his head in the game. Something was wrong, and he kept waving me off. And I was hoping he was right, but that nagging gut feeling kept coming back over and over. And the silence would come and go, and it's like it was toying with us. But I wasn't going to let it win. No way, no how. So now we are down in some deep rocks, and we aren't going to get out of there before it's dark, and I tell him to put his night vision goggles. We're going to hunt through the night. So we both get ready for the night. I can see the sun is still shining above, so we sit down for 1 hour and get me a little rest, and a little rest means a lot right now. So I open my eyes 55 minutes later, and he is amazed that I can do that without any kind of alarm. And I tell him that it's to train your body to do such things. So we are up and working in the dark now, the bottom edges of these giant boulders and some openings in the bottoms of them, looking for signs to see if they are using any of these natural openings for cover. It's now 2200 hours, and he said he has to change the batteries in his night vision. So we find a good place to do this, and it's done in less than 2 minutes, and we are back up and operating. Time seems to be dragging, and everything is just so still. It's now 00:2500 hours, and Ellis says his bladder needs to break. I agree, and we stop about 30 feet apart and relieve ourselves. And he comments that we are never going to catch up with these Dogman, and I say that we will soon enough. I started to say something, and his hand flew up, and we both dropped to a kneeling position and began listening very intently. It was coming from my right and ahead of me. I then glanced to Ellis to see where he was to my left, by maybe 8 yards, and maybe 3 yards behind my location while this noise is getting closer. Then the noise just quits. No movement anywhere, and it remained this way for several minutes, and we held our position. I glanced over to make sure Ellis was not moving any, and he was holding like he was supposed to. Then there was some small noises and movement, and I trained my rifle to this area of brush it seemed to be coming from. And there was an opening there big enough to get through. I was worried about Ellis. I could see his eyes, and they were as large as saucers, and he didn't have his rifle in the ready position. I knew that they were getting ready to come, but from where? I was uncertain about that. I thought I knew, but seldom does a Dogman hit you head on, mostly from the sides and rear. But our rear was covered, so they had 2 sides and the front, but Ellis was not looking to his left, and we had not even went over a shooting pattern when we got down to business. I was hoping he would remember what he had been taught to try to let all the targets get into view before we open up on them. But sometimes this will not work, and you do what has to be done at that point. Then came a loud snap, and here they came from 3 directions, and I'm seeing come from all directions, and know in my head instantly that there are from more than 4. And I dropped number 1 and then number 2, but they came from straight in front of me now. I have Dogman closing in from my right side, getting very close, and still more coming from the front, and Ellis has not shot yet. I can't think about Ellis right now and shoot number 3 to my right and number 4 to my right and scream at the same time to Ellis to get into this fight or we are going to die, both of us. I wheel around and kill number 5 right in front of me, maybe 3 yards away, and I glance at Ellis and he's just standing there staring at me. His whole chest is missing, and I start to lunge for him, and I'm cut off by a pair of Dogman. It's like they're grinning at me with blood and intestines hanging from their hands. I raise my rifle and start to scream and bust both in the heads, and down goes number 6 along with number 7. At this point, I think that I'm going to die. Too many Dogman left to fight. Still, as I turn to face the remaining Dogman, one dives and knocks my rifle from my hands and rakes my right thigh with his left hand and claws, and takes out my right hand and claws and sticks them into my stomach very low. I'm still able to pull my pistol and put it against his head and pull the trigger, and this action blows his right hand out of my stomach, and I take a foot and push him away. I glance at Ellis, and he's on his knees about to fall, but I still have 3 more Dogman to deal with. And when I try to stand, I fall backwards into the brush, which helps me hide me from some of the Dogman, and they have come straight on, more or less, now to get at me. Then they don't all rush at me. One at a time they come, one at a time, and I let them close, and when they do, I shoot each one with a single shot and take each one down, and finally, after all the smoke is cleared, I realized that I killed 11 Dogman by myself. I got up and made my way over to Ellis. He was on the ground, and he was just so barely hanging on to life. And he asked me if he was going to die. I gave him the honest answer as I could. I told him that if he was his time to die, he would, and if it wasn't, I would get him out of there, but I knew in my heart I would never get him out alive. He had my hand and explained his parents had no money to bury him, and he didn't take for any insurance. I told him not to worry about that. If something was to happen to him, I would take care of his funeral expense. And he died seconds later. I knew in my heart I was going to make Ellis a hero so everyone would never say anything bad about him ever again. I looked for our radios and couldn't find either one to call for extraction. So I figured I was going to have to carry Ellis out because you just don't leave your fellow American behind. So I placed him inside of his sleeping bag and bandaged up my wound, wrapped him in his sack and loaded my rifle and pistol and carried 1 extra magazine for each just in case. Finally got him across my shoulder and was starting what I considered to be a 6-day trip out. That first day I may have traveled 3 miles carrying Ellis's body, if I made it that far. The woods kept falling into silence, and I was worried there was more Dogman, and they were following me. I was now tired, hurt, and alone. This night I was thinking I knew that I'd killed 11 Dogman that day, and had the proof to back it up. So what I planned on doing was going to make Ellis a hero so everyone would shut up about him. I knew everyone would believe me except the CO, and if I put it in writing, he would have to challenge me on it, and he was not there, so I
didn't see that happening. He didn't want to draw any undue attention his way. I woke early the next morning, and man, I was hurting for sure. I sure wished I could have found either mine or Ellis's satellite radio so I could have called for a pickup. I tried to walk for 8 hours, but things weren't working out too well for me doing this at all, actually. And I wasn't about to leave Ellis's body for some animals to chew on. It was already where his parents could not have an open coffin. This day, in 8 hours, I figured I traveled 5 miles only. I was very weak and following morning, and there was a slight breeze, and very cloudy, and sprinkling rain. Not heavy rain, just enough to get you wet. And that sleeping bag his body was in was taking on water pretty fast and making everything heavy. And the ground was slicker, and by the end of this 3rd day, I knew where I was, but I still had at least 1 day's walk to get to where we found that man's body, if everything went good. I bedded down at night, and the woods were as still and quiet as could be. No sound, no movement, no nothing, so I decided to sit up for a while. Something's feeling bad wrong again, and I can't put my finger on it. If you can't see it, you can't shoot it or fix it, and this is about the place. The first time I had such a bad feeling, so I'm lying on top of my sleeping bag, pretty warm and everything, and something snapped, and I mean it's way too close for me to even grab it. Either one of my guns. The rifle is on the ground beside me, and my pistol is in the holster. And I mean less than 2 feet from my head to where it snapped lightly. I started to turn, and it pounced on me. About 30, maybe 40-pound cougar cub. Scared the bejesuses out of me. I thought I had been had. After about 4 or 5 minutes, it took off. I don't know where its mom or dad was, but glad I didn't have to find out. Finally, I dozed off, and I have the first of my nightmares. I hear Ellis calling my name, and I rise up to see him sitting on a rock maybe 10 feet from me, his chest ripped out, and he asked me over and over why I didn't try harder to save him. And finally I snapped to it, and it's still dark with no signs of Ellis, but I'm soaking wet with sweat again and cold now that I'm exposed to the elements, and have to get inside my sleeping bag, but never went back to sleep. Daybreak comes, and I am off again, trying with everything I have in me to make some extra time today, and make it to where we found the man's body by lunch. My body is screaming, no more, no more. I sit down beside a tree and wake up, and it's dark. Not sure how far I made it on this day, or what time it is, the 4th day. And on this night, once again, the nightmare returns 3 different times. I fell asleep, and each time I awoke to the same dream. The last time, every direction I looked, I saw Ellis, so I no longer slept that night. After the 3rd attempt. Day 5 up with the sun and a new problem. Rigor mortis has set. The buzzards are overhead in an awful way. He is flat as a board, no bend to his body whatsoever. I have to get Ellis at just the perfect spot to be able to carry him at all. And he is terribly hard to balance. Nothing to eat, gonna have to find some water today. My canteen is almost dry now as well, so I have to keep my eyes open for water, wishing for lots of things right now. Tried not to sleep last night, but fell asleep sitting up twice and had nightmares. Now, when I get back to Virginia, I will need to see someone to help me get rid of these nightmares. Trying to conserve my water and not drink any today, no food, and going to be till tomorrow before I reach Plato. Where are all of the people when you need them? I never can answer my own questions when needed. Laugh out loud. Day 6, ran out of water last night and have not had food for 6 days. Have not seen anything to shoot, nothing. Getting weaker by the day now, and I'm sure hate to have to leave Ellis up here and go and get help, but that may be what it takes to get both of us out of here. I'm going to get to the top of Plateau in just a couple of hours, so maybe, just maybe today will be a good day. I've made it to just past the place where we found the man, which means once I top Plateau, it will be all flat and maybe just a little downhill from here to that road. From here, maybe 2 more days tops. Get up this morning to get started and fall and hit my right knee on a rock from the fall and let go of a couple of cuss words that didn't help my situation any at the time, but I let them roll out. I was able to get Ellis up onto my shoulder again, and the rigor mortis had let go of his body, and once again draped over my shoulder, and we're off. Seems like the easiest day of carrying the young agent yet. Was making good time, and my right leg started to cramp up. I soon found a place to lie young Ellis on the ground and check my leg. Looking around and seeing no one, I dropped my pants to inspect my leg. And my right leg had started to swell some. So back on with my pants and taking an hour rest and going on with my plan. Wake myself back up and stand up, and a shooting pain goes through my leg like nothing I had ever felt. Is it an infection from the wound? Is it from my stomach wound? I've no clean bandages. My shirt is soaked with his blood and body fluids from carrying him. And my pants are the same way. Nothing to get clean strips out of. I then turn my attention to my sleeping bag, and there are some clean strips that I can use to redress my wounds. I spend the next hour and a half tearing strips to redo my wounds, knowing it's all downhill from here. Next thing, I take the stomach bandages off first, and these wounds look like they healed up and don't appear to have an infection around them. This makes me feel a lot better. I get it dressed back up and I feel better about myself, and then I drop my pants again and start to unwrap my leg and soon realize that I am in a whole lot of trouble myself. When I get it all unwrapped and look at it, it was oozing black and green pus from just about every inch of the wound. I was trying to figure out what to clean it with, and finally spotted some moss. So I headed for it, and the pain was almost unbearable trying to walk. Knew I had to get this wrapped back up and headed on out to the road once more. Or I would stiffen up and not be able to move, so I just pushed through it. Once again, it's time to get him up onto my shoulder and go to the road with Ellis. I was going to keep my word to him and make him out a hero in this hunt, even though it would not be true, but it would pay for his funeral for his parents. I was able to get him onto my shoulder with some trouble this time, and went on till it was totally dark. I lied him down and got what was left of my bag and laid it out and laid myself on top of it. I was sure hungry and thirsty at this time and felt like my body was shutting down. My leg was throbbing, so I didn't think about sleep or it would come easy, but it did. And so did the nightmares. After I woke up 2 times, I figured it's not even midnight yet, and start to watch the far west horizon, and I think I see cars on the interstate, but there's no sound from them, and I realize there is no sound around me. And for the first time, I notice the smell coming from Ellis's body, and start to regain some of my composure and take in my surroundings, knowing that something is on his scent, a natural predator. For how long have I not been paying attention to this? Is it the cougar's parents, close, and if so, where? I brighten up, start looking around, trying to find anything that does not look right, and chance movement that I can pick up on. Anything. Come on, Bill, you're better than this. Where has your mind been? Just have to get through tonight, and tomorrow you will get to the road, I tell myself, but not the silence is starting to hurt my ear. It's almost even scary to me. It's that still and quiet. I gaze back to the west horizon, see no lights from cars or an interstate now, but I know where I am, and at least tomorrow it will be downhill and flat walking. Soon I had when to fall asleep, again due to my tank being empty, and suffered through not waking up from a nightmare this time, and sleep through it. I woke up, and it was almost daylight. Nothing had happened to his body after I fell asleep, and nothing happened to me. So I waited for the sun to get up before I left to help and warm me, as I was very stiff and was having trouble moving, and not able to stand up yet. I was giving myself pep talks mentally and knew something was wrong, so I stripped out of the last strips on my bag and checked my leg one more time. It was looking worse today than yesterday. I thought to myself, I've got to get out of here. The buzzards were even lighting near me and Ellis's body on the ground, but I had to get up and put his 100 or so pound body on my shoulder and get moving so they would leave us alone. Finally, we're up and on our way, and it's our best day ever we have traveled, believe it or not. I'd found some water earlier in the day, but I only filled the canteen and didn't wash the wound because I had no steri strips to put back on it. So I didn't undress it, and knowing tomorrow I would be able to get help. I've no bag to lay on in my leg since I've sat down, feels like it's swelling, but I drift off to sleep, and after a little while I wake up when I hear some type of noise. I only open my eyes, no movement from me, just my eyes to see if I can spot anything close. Nothing. I know I heard something, so I start to turn my head. And here is someone's pet dog. I must be close to a home somewhere. It's got a collar on it, and it's friendly, but I have nothing to write with, nothing to put a note on it with anything. But this at least means that tomorrow we will get our way out of here. I know I only maybe 5 miles being out of here now at the most, and I'm excited. And then the dog just takes off running, and it's gone in the same direction that I will be walking out in the morning. And back to sleep I go, not worrying about anything at that moment, just rest. Then again, not long after I went back to sleep, I was awoken by some noise, something coming into our area, and I watch, and here comes the same dog. And about 5 minutes later, a second dog, a black lab, comes in and sits down, and has a beacon collar of some sorts on it, and it's flashing. And they are both barking about every 10 minutes. After another hour goes by, I see flashlights in the distance, and not knowing who they are, I hide and have my rifle ready just in case it's someone's land I happen to be on. And they don't want to listen to reason, but these dogs react to them. Soon they approach and find the sleeping bag, and I can see it's Brian and 5 other men. I call out to him, and he comes over and says he figured I was overdue, and that good or bad, he and 5 other wardens were coming in to try to find us. He then asked about Ellis, and so I made him a hero right then and there, but said we don't want this to go to the papers. I told him what was left back there, and that there was a fully automatic weapon back there also, that needed to be retrieved at some point. Also, handheld radios, if they could be found. I told him where I put the rifle, but I couldn't find the radios, and that I needed to get to the hospital. He then saw my wounds and went into a different gear, about to get out. He was going to leave Ellis's body and take me out and go back to get him, but I explained this was the 7th day, and I wasn't leaving him behind at this point. They could get me on my feet and I would walk, and they could carry Ellis out on some sort of stretcher they had brought with them. I asked how far it was being out, and he said maybe 2 miles, if that. One of the men had built up a fire and stretched out a bag for me to lay on, and I told him I would ruin it if I laid on it, and he laughed and said it would give him an excuse to buy a new one. So I went ahead and lied down on it, and they fed me some groceries and some coffee, and the coffee was sure good. I think I could have drank a whole pot. While we had been talking, 3 of them had put the sleeping bag that I had Ellis's body in inside a body bag, and the odor was gone almost immediately, except what was on me, and I smelled like death warmed over me. Early, just as the sun rose, 5 men lifted me onto a gurney and started down the road, and a large man took the lead with Ellis draped over his shoulder. When we arrived, the coroner was waiting, and so was an ambulance to take me to the hospital. I spoke with the coroner and told him that we were jumped by a pack of probably 20 wild dogs, and that we killed the majority, and that any testing that he needed to be done would be done by me, just to turn Ellis John's body over to how come from the CIA or the FBI to retrieve his body, to take to his parents for burial. So, cause of death, animal attack, and problem taken care of by 2 agents with loss of 1 agent. I said that it's correct, and he went away shaking his head, clearly not happy at getting told as to what to put on the death certificate without examining the body. But he did as he was told. I called my CO from Brian's phone and reported what had happened, just verbally. He called me a liar, but said he would notify the family, and when the arrangements were made, he would find out the financial details for me so I could pay for it for the family. Told him I would fill out my paperwork just as soon as I was out of the hospital, and was able to hike back in and retrieve the automatic rifle and to try to find the 2 missing radios. They then took me to the hospital and began to work on my wounds. They bathed them and soaked them in special solution bath that I would soak in twice a day in a whirlpool type of bath to get everything out of there. On the 3rd day, they finally sewed it back up with 344 stitches. More stitches in my leg now. One of the nurses was nice enough to go and purchase me some clothes with a card and bring them back to me, and Brian and his wife offered me a place to stay and a vehicle to drive back and forth to the doctor's. Most of the time his wife took me because I didn't know where the office was located. It finally came the day for the stitches to come out, and I was going to go up and get the other weapon, and Brian decided he was going to join me on this trip. And I tell him that after I let him see them, that I will have to erase that memory from his brain, and he laughs and says that's fine. And we talk, and I realize we actually could use this guy on our team. I start to see just how much he really knows, and I talk to the CO about him and ask if we could make an exception. He asks which one, and I say I don't know yet. Let me qualify him, and I will let you know. He may not be interested in moving all the way across the country. I asked if he would be interested in working along with me and doing what I do. And he asked, what do I do? I told him I hunt monsters, and he smiled again and said to show him first, then we'll talk. We are both in good shape, but I am weak, and it takes 2 days and almost a half to get where we fought the Dogman. I pick up the rifle and find my radio in the bush, where I was knocked back into the bush so deep when the one took a dive at me and got my leg and stomach. Must have hit the radio and knocked it free. Brian has a cloth over his mouth looking at what remains of the Dogman and says, "How on earth do these things actually live here among us?" He asked to see one of the rifles, and I handed him Ellis's, and he saw the clip is numbered 1, and he opened his pack and found 11 more clips in his pack numbered 2 through 12. And he said if he wore a vest. I answered he did. How many magazines were in his vest? And I said it was ripped away. I couldn't say for sure. And he showed me the number of magazines. Brian figured out that he never fired a shot. Said he didn't even have reloads in his vest for the fight. Finally, right at dark, found his radio 50-some yards away from where his body was on the ground when the final swipe was made at his chest and it ripped through in one direction. We made it out in 2 days, and I asked Brian again about working, and he said he was going to think about it. And I got Lewis on the phone, and he took care of Brian's memory for a short period of time. And we parted ways, and I never heard from him till almost 8 years later. I get a call, and I recognize the voice, and he tells me about his wife and kids. They have 2 kids now, and he can't leave because he has to help with the kids, and his parents are not going to move, and her parents aren't going to move. And his wife had been killed in a robbery for like $39. She was killed because she would not hand over her money.
And that was the hunt that made me realize who Victor truly was. He was a hunter, but just like in the beginning, when Victor first showed up, I was full of doubts and questions. And then the proof poured in. And if you've been with the channel long enough, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say his proof. Because it was there. And, well, I will always miss him. And with that, I want to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives people like me and you a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. It's treated with the respect we all deserve. Stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth or the answers, and God bless.